Okay, so let's quickly have a look at what a character looks like for the 5e plugin. Basically, a character sheet is just a JSON file that has a bunch of these specs. And the kind of the minimal entries for a spec is a name and a formula, which is kind of the value. And then it can have optional extras, and it can have a menu setting. If you don't include menu, it's going to assume it to be null. So if we have something like level or your proficiency bonus, where we just want to set a value associated with a name so that in our formulas we can refer to it by the name instead of the number, and that way we can easily update it. So that this would be a typical entry here. We've got a the setting LOV, level. We've got a value for it. In this case, it's just a pure constant, a numeric value. And then in the extras, we're saying that this is a value type entry. Okay. And because the menu here is null, it means that this entry does not show up in that UI pull-up screen. So this is a constant that you can use in, or I've configured it as a constant that you can use in potentially your formulas. So if there's anything like a spell that does something per level or something like that, you can make use of that, but it's not editable, when you're running Talespire. Same thing with proficiency bonus. So these are just purely set up here. And then I've set up here a label for armor shield, so that when I go down to my AC, I can calculate my AC by saying 10 plus dexterity plus armor plus shield spell. Okay, so these are basically just setting up values associated with a name. Okay. Then, there is one value here, or like a name that's reserved, and that's reaction. We already discussed those. So this is basically just adding that reaction so that you can toggle it. Obviously, if you don't add this to your character sheet, then you won't be able to toggle the reaction, and it's basically always going to assume your reaction is off. So then we can create those toggles. So there's really 3 ways that you can add a value to that pull-up screen. One way that you could add, say, let's say bless. So bless is a 1d4. So one way you can add that is just make a value field that does show up in the UI, and then the user can either write in 0 or 1d4. Okay, that's the easiest way to add things into the formula. Then if I create something like that, then it's very easy to put it into the formula. I just use the name. So I can show you an example of that. Right here, I have wild shape. I know you're unlikely to use the number of wild shapes you have left in a formula, but this shows the example of how to create that. So I've created a item called wild shape. It starts off with a value of 2. We can see that the type is a value. It's a value. And then to make it appear in the UI, you need an additional key here called edit, and then you give it a name. So this is kind of the name that's going to be referred to in the formulas, whereas this is kind of the display name that's going to show up on that UI. Okay, so this right here is what makes it show up in the UI. So anytime you have a key edit and you give it a name, that tells the character sheet or the plugin to make that show up in your UI. And then if I wanted it in my formula, I could just use this name. And every time I use this name, when it resolves it, it's going to go look it up and find out that it's 2. So again, I could just in my formula put a 2 there, but this way later on, if I level up and it changes to 3, for example, I could just come in here, change this one value, and anywhere where it's used in a calculation, it's going to update. Right? Same concept for our like strength, dexterity, constitution. Those you can see they don't have the edit key. That means they don't show up in the UI. But again, they're all set up for being used in formulas, and that way when I level up and I increase one of these, all I have to do is change that, and then all the skills, attacks, and so on that are based on that will automatically update. Okay, so then, so one way, again, to add, for example, bless, we could just create a value entry, and the user can enter 0 or 1d4. But that's kind of cumbersome. You don't want the user to have to write 0 or 1d4. They might mistype that or something like that. So then we'd like to do is have a toggle, just like you saw for my bless, guidance, and shield spell. I had the nice little toggle. So there's two ways to do that. We can create a toggle that is named bless, and these toggles are easy to create. Again, you got your name and your initial value. The value is going to be 0 or 1 for a toggle. We know that it's a type of value. And again, to make it show up, we need to have edit. So in this case, for example, shield spell, I've got shield spell. And the last thing that we do is we add one more key, which is toggle, and that tells it that it's not a text entry, it is a toggle. So, as I mentioned, we could call this directly, let's say, shield spell or bless or whatever, and it's going to resolve to a 0 or 1. So, for example, if we were doing a bless, we could write a formula that says something like this: 1d20 plus strength plus proficiency bonus. And then to apply our bless, we could just say plus bless times 1d4. So again, toggles resolve to a 0 or 1. So if we want to kind of add or not add 1d4, we could just take the bless, multiply it by 1d4, and bless, if bless is 0, if it's off, it's going to not add the 1d4 because it's going to be 0 times. And if it's 1, it's going to add it. So we could do that. But that looks a little ugly. Then when you're looking up, when you're looking at your formulas, you got this weird bless times 1d4. You could absolutely do that, but it doesn't look good. So what we can do is we can do a two-step toggle, and that is what I used in the example that I was showing, and I'll show it here. So what we do is we create a toggle. In this case, we just call it toggle 1. Name is not all that important. We make it a value, we make it editable on the UI, and we give it a nice proper name, and we make it a toggle. Okay, so exactly what we would have done before, but you notice that we didn't call this shield spell or bless or whatever. We called it toggle 1. And then we create a second entry called shield spell or bless, guidance, whatever you want. And that is where we use the toggle times, if it was bless, it would be 1d4. For shield spell, it's a +5 modifier, so +5 times 5. If it was guidance, it would be 1d4 also. So by doing this, now when we use the shield spell, in the formula, we're going to see shield spell and not the weird toggle times 5. But when it then looks up the shield spell, it's going to look up toggle times 5. It's going to look up toggle, and that's going to be whatever your 0 or 1, depending on what you have in the UI. And it's basically going to do the same thing as that, bless times 1d4, except by making it a second entry, we're giving it a much nicer name than that ugly formula. So by doing it in these two steps, your display looks a little bit nicer because it doesn't have a weird multiplication. So that's toggles. And then we have, if we scroll down to our skills, for example, we do have for ability scores, the value is just ability, and the only real difference is that it has this key that has the called value that has the actual ability score, whereas the formula has the modifier. Then most characters will have your saves. So we calculate the saves by just using, again, reference to the ability score, adding a proficiency bonus wherever your characters are proficient. But if we do that, that's not a roll, right? That's if we were to expose this in the menu and click on it, it would just give us the modifier. So what we really want is a save roll. So strength save roll, dex save roll, and so on. And those will do the 1d20 plus whatever your save value is. So again, we're just calculating our save bonus, and then we're adding it to a 1d20 for the actual roll. So you can see that this calculation of the save isn't in the menu. So it's just helping us figure out what the numbers should be, but then the actual roll is what ends up in the menu. And again, the menu entry here, whatever this path is, that's where you will find it in the radial menu. And you can add whatever hierarchy you want. The plugin supports that. So we're down here to skills. Skills are type skill, and they're otherwise the same as values. You got a name, you got your formula, and you got it somewhere in the menu. But you can get opposed skills. So if I go to stealth, so same thing, name, formula, type skill, but it has this extra addition here of key opposed and value, whatever it's opposed by, and that can be a comma delimited list. So we can see up here for grapple, there's our grapple, and it's opposed by athletics or acrobatics. And again, the plugin will look and automatically figure out which of these is higher and use that one. So that is that. Then we've got our attacks. Again, starts off the same way, name, formula. This time the type is attack. It's opposed by something. Eldritch Blast is, for example, AC. Frostbite is con. And it is important to note here, this, because we want it to be a con save roll, we want to use that con save roll, right? If we were to use just con save, then it would be the modifier and it wouldn't be added to anything, and that would be very low. So we want to have this go to the con save roll. And then for attacks, there is an extra section of damage, and this is a list. It is important. It's a string that represents a list here. If you just have one damage, that's great, but it supports more. So if you've got something like frostbite damage or eldritch blast and then your hex damage, you can list them here and it will execute those. And these are just names of then some damage entries. So this attack, if successful, will do frostbite damage and hex damage. So you can see here, we got frostbite damage and we got hex damage. Damage, very same. It's got a name, got a formula. The type is damage. And we just have here a damage type. This is used for determining vulnerability, resistance, and immunity. So that's the damage. And that's pretty well it, except, oh, sorry, heal. So we got cure wounds here. Yes, this is not the correct formula for cure wounds. I was just demonstrating here use of level. So same thing, very similar to damage. It's got the name, it's got the formula, and the type is just heal. And that's pretty well it. That's the secret. So really, again, it's all about just having kind of your key value pairs, so a name and a value, and then determining whether or not it should show up in your UI and show up in your menu. And when you roll any of these, it will determine what those values are, plug them in, make the roll, and if there's an opposed portion, it'll do the same thing for the opposed portion, and resolve it. So again, as you can see, all of the smarts, all of the stuff of what you want to use with your formulas is totally configurable here. Again, with like the skill checks, for example, skill checks, I added the guidance and that generic spell bonus, but that was my decision. If I am not going to ever use that skill bonus, I could just remove that. If I have magic items that add, to my skills, I can add that here. Totally configurable. Unlike the 5e rule set where there was, a generic skill bonus, a generic attack bonus, a generic damage bonus, but that was kind of it. And if you wanted other stuff, you had to modify the plugin to add those things. Here, if you want to add something, no problem, configure it, bam, restart, and you're good to go. So that's pretty well it for the character aspect of it.